We know that the words, "He has risen, he is not here," were spoken by the angel this Resurrection Sunday. And these were the words this angel spoke that shook the world. And it changed the course of all of human history. And in the decades before and even after Jesus' resurrection, we know that there were many people throughout history who have claimed to be messiahs. They have said that they are the Lord, and they were able to bring about a following of many people who would follow them. But yet, as you learn about these individuals, all of them died. And then after they died, their movements collapsed. But what we see in Jesus is that after he died, his movement didn't collapse, but it has spread. The first 3 centuries, it spread through all of Rome, and then now it is spreading throughout the entire ends of the earth. And so you can't keep Jesus down. He is alive and he is risen. And what I want to do is look, before we look at Mark 16, is I want to take you to Acts 5, because in Acts 5, you see 2 examples of men who were so-called messiahs that brought about a movement, and then they died, and their movements died out with them. And this was right after Jesus rose from the grave, and after he ascended into heaven, and his disciples were spreading the good news of Jesus' resurrection to many people around. And as they were doing this, they met extreme opposition, enemies who wanted them dead. And in Acts chapter 5, we read these words: "When the enemies heard the disciples' teaching, they were enraged and wanted to kill them. But a Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, held in honor by all the people, stood up and gave orders to put the men outside for a little while. And he said to them, 'Men of Israel, take care what you are about to do with these men. For before these days, Theodos rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him. He was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean rose up in the days of the census and drew away some of the people after him. He too perished, and all who followed him were scattered. So in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this undertaking is of man, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow him. You might even be found opposing God.' So these men took Gamaliel's advice." I bring this example up because you had 2 men after the days of Jesus' resurrection ascension who were saying that they were Jesus, that they were the Messiah. And they were able to gain a following. But yet, once these men died, their following died out with them. Their followers scattered all around. And ever since these men, there's been other men who have said, "We're the Messiah too." You may remember the news story a couple of years back of David Koresh in Waco, Texas. He acted like he was a Messiah. He was able, with his charisma, to gain several followers. And what happened when Koresh died? The movement died out with him. What has happened with Jesus when he died? Well, he rose from the grave, and the movement has continued to expand. And we know this because it started in Mark chapter 16. So let's look now at Mark chapter 16 of this incredible movement that has taken place since the day of the resurrection. "When the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on, the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, 'Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?' And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, 'Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you.' And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." The gospel of Jesus Christ. As we look at this resurrection story, this account from Mark, we're gonna see a few things about these 3 women that happened. The first thing I want you to notice about the 3 women that are mentioned here is that they were steadfast. If you go back to verses 1 and 2, you'll see that when the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. What we know about these 3 women, if you read the end of Mark chapter 15, is you'll see that Mark mentions them 2 other times at the end of Mark 15. And we learn that these 3 women were at the crucifixion when Jesus was crucified and died. They were there while he was being killed. Well, fast forward just 3 on the 3rd day, 2 full days, and then Sunday morning, it counts the 3rd day. And we know that very early in the morning, these 3 women who were there at the crucifixion, they also wanted to be there to anoint his body with oils and spices and a great fragrance that he would have. You know, what's interesting when you go back to Mark 15 is you'll learn that Jesus died right before the Sabbath started. So from sundown to sundown, Friday evening to Saturday evening, the Jews used to observe a holy day called the Sabbath, a day of rest, a day of worship. Well, when Jesus died, it was right before sundown, and you have this man named Joseph of Arimathea. He runs to Pilate and he says, we don't have a lot of time to bury the body, but I want to make sure that Jesus' body is buried before sundown, because if he had waited till after sundown, he would have had to wait a whole nother 24 hours before being able to bury the body of Jesus. And so what he did was, Joseph, he ran to Pilate, and he was able to convince Pilate to take the body of Jesus and to quickly take him to a tomb. And when Joseph took the body of Jesus to a tomb, he wrapped him up in this cloth, but he wasn't able to anoint the body with spices and oils and fragrances. The reason why he wasn't able to do it was because he ran out of time. He ran out of time, and then the sundown happened and the Sabbath was observed. But Joseph, by God's grace, was able to get the body of Jesus in the tomb before sundown. That's important because anytime a person like Jesus or any Jew would be buried, they not only would be buried on the day that wasn't the Sabbath, but they would also have their bodies anointed with spices and different oils for 2 reasons. One was to honor the dead, and 2 was to help from the odor from spreading. And so these women, they waited at just the right moment. They woke up really early in the morning on Sunday, right after the Sabbath took place, and they journeyed to the tomb to anoint the body with oil and fragrances. This shows that these women were steadfast. They were devoted to the Lord. They were diligent in what they were doing. And just as they were with Jesus at the crucifixion, so they wanted to be with Jesus on that Sunday morning and anoint his body. Now, what about the men, the disciples? Do you remember what happened to them when Jesus was arrested and on trial and crucified? They ran away. They fled. But yet we see these women, they didn't run away. They weren't afraid. They weren't cowards. They were courageous, and they were the first to be there at the resurrection. An amazing, remarkable thing about these 3 women. It showed their loyalty, their steadfastness, their dedication and devotion to Jesus. The second thing, though, that we learn about with these women is that they were sorrowful. There's a statement out there that says, sorrow wakes early. And these women were distraught. They were discouraged. They were sad. They were upset. Why? Because Jesus died. They were thinking he was it. They were thinking he's the Messiah. Now they're probably scratching their head wondering, I don't know if this man was who he said he was. So he's gone, like every other movement that's happened. And so they're sad. And we not only know that they're sad because, they woke up early and they were sad at the crucifixion, but we also know in verse 3 why they're sad. They were saying to one another on their journey to the tomb, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? Now, why does this tell me that they were sad? Well, it's because I want you to know that the tomb where Jesus was in, the stone weighed anywhere between 1 and 1.5 tons. These women, they didn't have a plan to move this stone out of place. They were on their journey hoping that they would just somehow run into a stranger who could help them move the stone away, because they knew that they, the 3 of them, could not physically push this 1 to 1.5 ton stone out of place. And so this tells me that they were distraught. They were confused. They were distressed because they were going out of duty saying, well, we got to do something in our sadness and sorrow, but yet we don't really have a plan. Hopefully somebody will show up to help us move this stone. It reminds me that whenever we lose a loved one, that the first day or 2 is shocking. You're just mourning and you're grieving and you're saddened by it. And it's like you had the carpet pulled up from underneath you. And then a couple days go by and you begin to think to yourself, what can I do? Is there something I can do? And so you start to think to do something. And especially those of us who are friends with those that have lost loved ones, we think, well, what can we do? Can we provide a meal? Can we go and visit? And can we give words of encouragement? And those things are all important. Well, these women, they had just lost Jesus. They were saddened and they're thinking, what can we do? We got to do something here. And so they gathered their oils and fragrances and they went on the journey hoping that when they got there, the stone would be moved at a place or somebody would be there. But they really had no plan. Again, this tells me they were sorrowful over this. They were saddened by the death of Jesus. But as they're getting there, they go from sorrow to being startled. Look at verses 4 and 5. Looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large, and entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. So on their way to the tomb, they're journeying, and they're thinking, I hope somebody's gonna help us roll the stone away, because it's massive, it's very large. And they get there, and they see that the stone had been rolled away, and nowhere to be found. And they're thinking, how did this happen? And then they enter the tomb, and what do they see? They see a bright light, the man with a long white robe. He's an angel. And they're blown away by it. It says the word alarmed by it. You know what alarm means? It indicates a kind of fear and distress that is profound and intense. Alarmed is, in the Greek verb, it's a Greek word that is used only to express strong fear and agitation. They were shocked, they were amazed, they were frightened by the sight of this angel. And as I'm reading this story this week, I couldn't help but think about my reaction. I mean, if I'm coming in a tomb, there's no body to be seen, empty tomb, and I look over and there's a bright angel, what would I do? I'd freak out, I'd say, what in the world? What is happening here? Wouldn't you? I'd be alarmed, I'd be frightened, I'd be disturbed, I'd be startled. These women, they were blown away by what they saw. They were just simply blown away by it. And they saw this angel. Now, what's interesting here is that this angel, who is he? Well, we know from other gospel accounts that there are two angels. Why did Mark only mention one? And this is where critics of Christianity, they read the resurrection stories and they say, oh, there's a contradiction. Mark's talking about one angel, but then the other accounts are talking about two. So what is it? There must be a contradiction here. There's no contradiction. Because when you read this account of Mark, it says that they saw an angel. He didn't say only one angel was there. He said there was an angel, and then the other thing that Mark did was he emphasized this particular angel and not the other one because this angel spoke. He said something. And so as the angel's speaking, the women are still blown away by the presence, and then they're blown away that this man's talking. And he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who is crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. He is risen. He is not here. This is a one-word sentence in the Greek. It's one brief word that announces the greatest miracle that has ever taken place throughout all of human history. This sentence is the door to understanding who Jesus Christ is. A better translation was that the angel said he was raised. He was raised. What's he talking about? He's saying that something supernatural has raised this man. Someone supernatural has raised this man. And that someone is God. God Almighty has raised this human man, and he's raised him to life. What we know in Romans chapter 8, verse 11 is that the Spirit of God resurrected our Savior. So by the power of God, the dead man was raised from the tomb. This was an act of God and God alone. Death had not interrupted the Lord's long-term plans. His agenda had not died. Jesus has risen. He's not here. The tomb is empty. He's alive, and he's ruling and reigning on all of his people's behalf. Praise be to God that he's alive. Praise be. As I was looking at this account this week, I came upon an example of a true story of a Muslim man. He was living in Africa, and he came upon a Christian missionary, and the missionary told him about this resurrected Jesus. And this Muslim man came to faith in Jesus Christ. And when he went back to his Muslim friends and family members, he was scared to death. He's thinking, oh no, what are they gonna say? And so a lot of them were just scratching their heads saying, man, you left us, you kind of disowned us, and you're going into this Christianity thing, why? And the Muslim man told his friends and his family, he said, I'll tell you why. Because one day I was thinking about life, and I was thinking about myself on a journey, a spiritual journey down a path, down a road. And I'm traveling down this path and down this road, and I reach a fork in the road, and there's two different paths to take. And I look down on one path, and I see a dead man. And then I look on the other path, and I see a man who's alive. He said, do you know who I went to for advice? I went to the man who was alive. Case in point, that's why I'm a Christian. He said, I'm sorry, my friends, but Muhammad, who came up with Islam, he dead. He's dead. He ain't around. But Jesus is alive. I'm going to follow the man who's alive. That's why he gave his life to Christ. That's why he did it. Just like that man was startled, these women on Resurrection Sunday were startled. They were blown away by not only what they saw, but what they heard from the angel. So my question is, what about you? Have you been blown away by this Jesus? Have you given your life to this Jesus? Believe me, he is alive right now. His spirit is with us. And one day, his physical body is gonna come back to this world, and he's gonna make this world a whole new place. It's gonna be perfect. There's no longer gonna be sin or death or cancer or divorce. None of that. But it's gonna be a perfect world ushered in by our perfect King. So if you believe that message, just like the women that day, be amazed by that message. Be startled by Jesus. Be enamored with him and embrace this incredible message of hope that Jesus is alive and he's conquered sin and death, and he's gonna come back and make this place perfect. And you and I as believers are gonna be with him for all eternity. The women, you see, they embrace this message. But the last thing I want you to see about them is that they were also spectators of all of this. Look again at verse 6. The angel told them, see the place where they laid him. And then verse 7, go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. These women, they were spectators. They were onlookers. They were viewing the scene. They were eyewitnesses. They didn't just see it at the resurrection. They saw all of this, or at the crucifixion, they saw all of this at the resurrection. They went into the tomb and they saw where the body had been placed, and they thought, well, this tomb is empty. There's no body here. That's interesting. They see an angel. The angel says, hey, I want you to go tell this message to the disciples. And then the angel said, yeah, go tell them that immediately. And then Jesus is gonna actually appear and you'll see him. So all of these things make me realize that these women were spectators. They were observers. They were eyewitnesses to the scene. Well, there's a couple things about these three women. First, if you study ancient Israel and you learn about their legal system, unfortunately in this day, in this time period, women did not have a strong voice when it came to the witness stand. If women were placed on the witness stand, their word wasn't really taken as true. It was on the same lines of that of a slave, and it was horrible how they viewed women back in the day. Well, some people would look at this and say, you know, this story is just a contradiction, it's made up. But here's the thing, if someone were trying to falsify the testimony of the resurrection of Jesus, the last thing they would do is put that testimony on the lips of women. But Mark is not interested in the court of law. He's interested in the truth. And he's conveying exactly what happened, and he does it down to the detail of where the angel was standing. So Mark wanted to convey every detail that he knew about. And so that's why he wrote this gospel, including that women were the first eyewitnesses on the scene. But the other thing I want you to notice is that Mark mentions these three women. He mentions Mary Magdalene, who is the woman who Jesus drove evil spirits out of. He mentioned Mary, the mother of James, who was one of the disciples. James, not the son of Zebedee, but the other James. And then he mentions this lady named Salome. Salome was the wife of Zebedee and the mother of the other disciple, James, the son of Zebedee. So these are the three women that Mark mentions. But if you look at the other gospel accounts, there's other women mentioned who are on the scene of the resurrection. There's Joanna, and there's Mary, the mother of Jesus. I think there were 6 women in total that we know about that were at the resurrection. So why did Mark only mention these 3? Again, critics will look at this and they'll say, you have a contradiction. Mark says one thing, but all these gospels say another. Do you know why Mark mentioned only these 3 and not the other women who were at the resurrection? It's because if you go back to the end of Mark 15, Mark mentions these 3 women 2 other times, that they, by name, were there at the crucifixion. Then a 3rd time, he writes yet again that these 3 women were at the resurrection. Why did Mark emphasize only these 3 women? It was not a contradiction. He did it because he was saying to those who he was writing to in his time that these 3 women are still alive. And if you want to know about what happened on this Resurrection Sunday, go talk to them. They're still alive as I'm alive. I'm writing this gospel, and just go talk to these ladies because they were eyewitnesses on the scene. That's why he mentioned it 3 different times, these 3 ladies. So again, the critics will say, hey, these stories are different. No, there's all one story. That's why you got to really understand the context of it. But these women, they were spectators. They were eyewitnesses. It was these 3 ladies that Mark specifically wrote about. And after they saw all this, and after they heard this from the angel, verse 6 says, they went out and they fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. What's fascinating here is that the women, after they were blown away by what they saw, an empty tomb, an angel, and they hear this message, what do they do with the message? The angel says, go tell the disciples. And what did they initially do? Oop. They didn't say anything. They were silent. Why? Well, it says they were bewildered. But you know what else I think was happening here? Is that they were scared. They were worried, what we just saw, was that a hallucination? Were we dreaming about this? Will people actually believe us? When we go and tell them that we saw an angel, are people gonna take us serious? So they're probably second guessing themselves, and they're silent. As I think about these ladies and their initial reaction of being silent, I think about you and me. And how often are we silent when it comes to telling people about Jesus? How often are we silent when it comes to the resurrection? You know, when's the last time that we talked to others about the resurrection? It may have been a while. And why is that? Well, there's probably a number of reasons. We might be too busy, or we might be afraid of what people are gonna think about us or how they're gonna respond. Initially, the women were pretty frightened by the whole thing, and they kept it a secret. They were spectators looking from the outside, really. But here's the good news. When you look at the other gospel accounts of the story of the resurrection, we know that the ladies didn't stop there in silence. We know that they went from being spectators to participators. That they got involved, they rolled up their sleeves, and they went to the disciples and they told them the message eventually that Jesus has risen. Luke 24 tells us, returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. You know what happened here? These women, they eventually found their voices and they overcame their fear. And it was a secret too wonderful for them to keep. It was too wonderful for them to keep. This is good news. And these women were changed by this message because they were changed by the messenger, Jesus Christ. They were changed by him, and they wanted others to experience him and to be changed by him too. And so they went and they told the disciples this message, and they would later tell many, many others, as Mark mentioned, the 3 ladies. He said, just go talk to them and they'll tell you what they saw. I bring all this up because if you are in Jesus Christ, if you follow him, if you love him, just as Cooper and Carrie have done today, and they've publicly said, I'm gonna commit my life to Christ and I'm following him. An act of courage and bravery, an act of commitment. If you've done like they have done and like these 3 women did, then wouldn't you want to tell the good news too? I mean, there's There's no better news than this. This is the greatest news of all of history. It's not gonna get any better. This is the best news there is. Well, I will say, it is gonna get a little better when he comes back, okay? But both those things are great news. So the reality is don't keep it tight. Don't keep it a secret. Share it. Share it with intensity. Share it with passion. Share it with love and humility. Because the watching world, they need hope. This world needs hope. This world needs peace. This world needs joy. And what better message to give them than this message of the resurrection? Jesus is alive and he's coming soon. And so let's go out and be messengers for him and for his glory.